So the other thing that I promised I would talk a bit more about is how we do these permissions and how we realize having as much autonomy as possible for the sites that choose to work with SLATE. So let me go through kind of a bit of an example of that. The main idea is that SLATE itself is trying to behave as a guest on every Kubernetes cluster that it is allowed onto. So it does not take administrative control of your cluster. That remains instead in your hands as the person who set that cluster up. And you, as that owner, have control to regulate who else SLATE will let into your cluster and what those people will be able to do there. So you've already seen in the previous diagram, we label the Kubernetes clusters that join the federation as edge clusters. So in the diagram on this slide, I've got some number of those hypothetically federated through SLATE. In the middle, there is the core components of the SLATE platform that mediate the connections. And then at the top, I've put in two users of SLATE who I will label as application administrators. We'll talk in a little bit more detail about the different roles within SLATE. But for now, these are two people who want to use SLATE to deploy some infrastructure services. So let's say hypothetically that one of these edge clusters that's been federated by SLATE is owned by some organization A. And one of these administrators is a member of organization A, is potentially one of the people who federated that cluster. Because that person belongs to the group that administers that cluster, from day one of that cluster being joined to SLATE, they can use SLATE to deploy applications to it. So that person from organization A can basically, as quickly as Link had demonstrated, press a few buttons and start running some application that they want to run for their site. On the other hand, if we have a second application administrator who does not belong to that organization, they're part of some organization B, and they want to run things on organization A's cluster, by default, SLATE will forbid them to do that. And they just won't be able to touch that cluster. Oh, go ahead, next slide, please. However, of course, the point is that we want to enable federation and sharing of resources as appropriate. So if organization B talks to organization A and explains the case for why their application belongs on organization A's hardware, organization A can grant them access, and then they will be able to proceed with deploying their application. So the administrators of a cluster get to choose whom they allow in to use their cluster. And what's more, they can even choose to regulate which applications the particular groups that they allow in will be allowed to deploy. So for example, if at a site, one group wants to be allowed to run a cache, they can be given permission to run just that cache, but nothing else. Another group that needs a database, say, can be given permission to run that database, but they will not be running anything else. So application administrator is one of the conceptual roles that we've identified within the framework of operating our platform. I wanted to quickly go through the rest of the roles that we talk about and what we expect these people to do. So the first and kind of most fundamental one that we talk about is a platform administrator, because SLATE has some of these central components, so somebody needs to set those up and keep those running. At the present time, for the reference platform, that's us, the developers of SLATE, who also administer the platform. And so that includes all of these bits you've been seeing, like these interfaces, this API server, and the infrastructure behind that application catalog. So the next role is an edge administrator, which is basically anyone who chooses to bring a Kubernetes cluster into the federation. And one thing that I should note is that these roles, of course, are not mutually exclusive. So the SLATE developers, who are also the administrators of the reference platform, in order to bootstrap things, we have joined several clusters into the federation. And as you'll see, there can be overlap in several of the other roles as well. So kind of the point of this is to get some applications running on the Federation. So as I've already said, we label anyone who does that as an application administrator. And of course, that can mean that you can be an edge administrator, bring your cluster to the Federation, and then also be an application administrator and run applications on your own cluster. But an application administrator could also be someone who doesn't administer any hardware and just deploys applications with appropriate permission on other edge administrators clusters. So running things on one or more clusters makes you an application administrator. So of course, if anybody's going to run any applications, given that we limit those on the platform to what's in the application catalog, somebody has to put things in the catalog. And so we label anyone who works on that task an application developer. That doesn't necessarily have to mean a person who wrote that whole application from scratch. It could just be someone, for our purposes, who packages that application for use on the platform. So for example, obviously, we did not write xrootd, but some of us on the SLATE team acted in the role of application developers for SLATE and packaged up, for example, stash cache in order to get it in our catalog. So the other thing that goes with that is the application catalog wouldn't provide a lot in the way of guarantees if just anybody could put anything into it. So we have the concept of an application reviewer, who is supposed to be someone who independently applies a review process to anything brought to the Federation by an application developer, just to ensure that it meets our basic standards for safety and consistency of applications that we want to have on the platform. So yeah, those are the different roles for people in and around the Federation. You'll notice that a lot of that currently is done by us, the SLATE developers. We've basically done all of the application development and all of the application reviewing. We operate some of the clusters. Of course, this is something that we want to grow over time and become more community driven as basically, if the platform becomes useful to more people, we're hoping that more people will want to, for instance, act as application developers and bring new applications to the platform. And that if that becomes successful, we will also want to expand the process or the pool of people doing the reviewing so that that's truly a thing that's owned by the community that's using it.